when we landed in Port Moresby there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they handed us a tent, and they said, just they're on the hill, just go put your tent up and find a spot. They gave us a folding bunk, and they gave us mosquito netting, but we were mosquitoes. And they had what they called kunai grass, and it probably was maybe 4 foot high, just like wheat. Just, you know, you touch it and you'd cough and sneeze and whatnot. Well, that's what we put our tent up in, and the tent was at about a 40, maybe a 30-degree angle. So we were on a hill, and that night, of course, we just laid the mosquito netting over the top of us. Well, you don't do that. Mosquitoes, they go right through that netting if it's laying on you. So we found out real quick we better first off, we better dig back into the hill and get us something flat, and then we better get our fixing. I think we built what they called a T on the end of the bunk, nail it in, and then the mosquito net would come over it. And so we worked like mad that next day, leveling off that ground big enough to get our tent level and whatnot. And so that's the way we started in New Guinea.
How'd you like New Guinea?
Well, I look back on it, and we knew we had a job to do, and it didn't really bother me. I just, I think most of us felt, well, this is the way it is,
Did you meet any of the natives?
Yeah, we later on met the natives, and we saw them quite often. You never saw the women, and because the Japanese, when they came in, they grabbed the women as fast as they could, and the natives, they sent their women up into the hills. They wouldn't leave them in the camp, and if they heard anybody coming, they're like Japanese or even us, they scattered up into the hills. And natives were, we never had much to do with them, and they were very pleasant. They had some of them that would speak a pidgin English and could understand some of us and could speak enough to tell us what they wanted. But we didn't have much, action with them. The Australians did, because they used them as workers around the tent, around the camp and whatnot.
Were there a lot of Australians there?
Quite a few Australians. They had Australians flying units there, and they had Australian ground troops. Australians had a tough go. One of their duties was to go up. See, we had the own standing mountains between us. New Guinea, any water on one side, water on the other. Mountains are about 14,000 foot high, and we were, of course, from on one side. The Japs were still over there. We hadn't taken anything across the way, and they had trails going through along mountain trails, and the Australians, they would take maybe 10 of their men with an officer in charge, and he'd go up on the trails, and then they'd camp alongside the trails, just sleep on the ground and whatnot, and wait for the Japanese to come by. And they never took any prisoners. They just shot them and drug them off the side, because they couldn't take any prisoners. So they had a tough time. I talked to one of the officers one time when I was in the hospital, and he told me about some experiences, and he said it was pretty tough living up there. They'd be up there for months at a time, eating off the land and whatnot. It was pretty tough for them. But anyway, we were assigned to a squadron. We were assigned to the 90th Bomb Group, is what it was, called the Jolly Rogers. And they had our insignia was skull and cross bombs, not bones, skull and cross bombs. And we're known as the Jolly Rogers because our commander was Colonel Rogers. And of course, he named us the Jolly Rogers.
What Air Force was that?
5th Air Force.
Yeah.
And we, at first, there were a B-17 outfit there, but we, 24s, could fly further, fly higher, carry a bigger bomb load, and that's what we needed over there in the islands, because we had long flights.
More than a 17?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so they closed the 17 outfit and sent them over to Europe. And then we had another B-24 outfit right there on the same place as we were there at Port Moresby. And we flew out of there, and most of the missions were across the hump to the different Japanese bases there. One big one was WWII. It was a pretty big place. And they had several other little, mostly ground troops that we would bomb, or there where they lived and whatnot. And
What elevation were you primarily bombing at?
pardon?
What elevation were you bombing at?
Usually about 18,000, right about then.
You weren't doing any low stuff?
Yeah. Well, we did some low stuff, but normally it was night, or if we really wanted to hit a target and make sure we got on the target, and we pretty well knew they wouldn't have any fighter aircraft or whatnot, we would fly low to make sure we hit the target.
Were you getting many fighter attacks?
Well, we were very fortunate in that right after we got there, they had a place, what I mentioned at WWII, and they had about 300 fighter Japanese aircraft and strafing aircraft, twin engine and whatnot. Of course, we didn't know that, but the word got to the higher up, it was there and whatnot. And they breaking their code, apparently they found out they were getting all ready to make a big hit on us there at Port Moresby. And so they set up a mission, and all we knew, they said, this is what you're going to do. And we left to get over the target about 2 in the morning. And we carried 4 2,000 bombs. And our job was to get over, and we were 6, 7, and 8,000 feet. And we went over in the dark, single, by ourselves. Came across the target and were to drop the bombs on the airstrip and put it out of commission. And so that the next morning, the airplanes would be on the ground, Japanese airplanes would be on the ground, and then our whatever fighters and A-20s and B-25s, strafers that we had, they put them in the air, and it worked out great. We put the airstrip out of commission for the next morning. Of course, the Japanese immediately went out and started filling in the holes and whatnot. But 2,000-pound bombs, they put in pretty good holes. And when you had something like 30 airplane or more B-24 dropping all 2,000-pound bombs, you put in a lot of dents in that airstrip. And of course, the next day, the fighters and the A-20s and 25s came in and strafed and just practically wiped out the Japanese Air Force, and didn't wipe it completely out, but they did a big damage. And then the next night we went and did the same thing, and the next morning. And so we cut their strength down pretty well at the very beginnings, which was great for us, because then when we went over, we would have fighters come at us, but not bunches like like they had in Europe and whatnot.
How good were their fighter pilots?
They were quick, very fast, and our fighters had trouble with them because we had, at the time, we had P-40s and we had P-39s, which are slow and not maneuverable. We eventually, our first good airplane, and we didn't have anything to go with us as top cover, because we went too far for them to go with us. So when we went by ourselves, and of course we flew tight formation, and when you fly, 6 airplane in formation, and you got 50s, fire and waist, Tom Gunner 250s, bottom 250s, nose 250s, tail 250s, and you put 6 airplanes together, you got a lot of firepower. So they were pretty cautious coming in. They'd come in, but usually they come in and go for the leader. And so we shot down quite a few, and it was, we had to go at it. And